I'm Elena Vasquez, and I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I don't believe in haunted houses. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural. I'm a psychiatric nurse. I've spent 7 years working with patients experiencing psychosis, hallucinations, and severe mental breaks. I know what the human mind is capable of fabricating when it's under stress. But what happened in that house wasn't in my mind. It was real. And it was Hungry Point 2 years ago. I was 28, living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, working night shifts at the psychiatric ward of University Hospital. The job was brutal, physically exhausting, emotionally draining, and the kind of work that seeps into your dreams and turns them dark. My best friend since college, Priya Mehta, had been begging me to take time off for months. Priya was a software engineer, the kind of person who approached problems with ruthless logic and zero tolerance for mysticism or superstition. We'd bonded in college over our shared skepticism, our love of true crime podcasts, and our complete inability to understand why anyone would willingly watch horror movies. "They're not even scary," Priya would say. "Everyone makes the dumbest possible decisions. Real people wouldn't act like that." I agreed with her then. I don't anymore. In October, Priya found a rental listing for a weekend getaway. A restored Victorian house in the mountains of southern Colorado, near a tiny town called Silver Peak. The listing showed a gorgeous 3-story house with original woodwork, a wraparound porch, mountain views, and complete isolation. The price was suspiciously low, $200 for the entire weekend, but the reviews were decent. Most mentioned the beauty of the location and the house's unique character. One review said, "Not for light sleepers," which we laughed about. Another said, "The house has a presence," which we assumed meant it was drafty or creaky. We should have read between the lines. We left Albuquerque on Friday afternoon, Priya driving her silver Subaru Outback, me riding shotgun with a bag of road trip snacks and a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint. The drive took 5 hours, winding through increasingly remote mountain roads. Cell service dropped completely about an hour before we reached Silver Peak. The town itself was barely a town. Maybe 200 residents, one general store, a post office that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1952, and a cluster of houses that seemed to be slowly surrendering to the forest. The rental house sat another 3 miles outside town, accessible only by a dirt road that climbed steeply through dense pine forest. We arrived just as the sun was setting, the sky turning that particular shade of bruised purple that happens in the mountains. The house emerged from the trees like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of dark wood and stone, peaked roofs, narrow windows that reflected the dying light like eyes. "Holy shit," Priya breathed. "It's actually beautiful." It was, from the outside, it looked like a meticulously restored piece of history. The wraparound porch had been freshly painted, the gardens were maintained, and the whole structure radiated a kind of austere elegance. The owner had left the key in a lockbox by the front door, along with a handwritten note. "Welcome. Please make yourselves at home. The house prefers quiet guests. Checkout is Sunday by noon. Do not enter the basement. M. Wardwell, the house prefers quiet guests." I read aloud. "That's a weird way to phrase it." Priya shrugged. "Probably just quirky old lady speak. And the basement thing is probably foundation issues or storage." We unlocked the door and stepped inside. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Hardwood floors gleamed in the fading light. A grand staircase curved upward to the 2nd floor. Original light fixtures, converted from gas to electric but maintaining their antique appearance, cast warm pools of light. The furniture looked period appropriate. Heavy oak pieces, velvet upholstery, intricate rugs that must have cost a fortune. "This is incredible," Priya said, setting down her bag. "How? Is this only $200? Maybe nobody wants to drive this far. I suggested, though I didn't quite believe it. We explored the first floor. The living room had a massive stone fireplace with wood already stacked beside it. The kitchen had been updated with modern appliances while maintaining the Victorian aesthetic. The dining room table could have seated 12 people. Everything was perfect, almost suspiciously so. Too clean, too carefully arranged, like a museum display rather than a place where people actually lived. The second floor had 4 bedrooms, each beautifully decorated with antique furniture and thick quilts. Priya claimed a room at the front of the house, with windows overlooking the driveway. I took the room next to hers, which faced the forest. The third floor, we discovered, was a single large attic space that had been converted into a library. Built-in bookshelves lined every wall, filled with hundreds of books, mostly old, leather-bound volumes with faded titles. Okay, this is actually amazing, I admitted, running my fingers along the spines. I could spend the whole weekend up here. We're spending the weekend relaxing, Priya corrected. No work talk, no stress, just food and hiking and maybe some of that wine you brought. We made dinner in the beautiful kitchen, pasta with vegetables and too much garlic, and ate at the long dining room table, laughing about work stories and catching up on gossip. Everything felt normal, perfect even. Around 10 o'clock, we decided to explore the property before it got too dark. The backyard was massive, extending into the forest with a small garden shed and what looked like the remnants of an old greenhouse. At the far edge of the property, we found something odd. A stone well, maybe 4 feet across, covered with a heavy iron grate that was padlocked shut. Why would you lock a well? Priya wondered aloud. Keep animals from falling in. I guess, though I couldn't imagine any animal getting past that grate in the first place. As we stood there, a sound drifted up from the well. Not water, not wind, something else, a soft, wet sound like breathing. Deep, rhythmic, almost organic. Priya and I looked at each other. Did you hear? She started. Wind in the well shaft. I interrupted, though I didn't believe it. Creates weird acoustic effects. We walked back to the house quickly, neither of us mentioning the sound again. That night, I couldn't sleep. My room was comfortable, the bed was perfect, but something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of oppressive silence that makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound. And there were sounds, small ones, creaks from the floorboards, even though no one was walking. A soft tapping from inside the walls, irregular and arrhythmic. The whisper of air moving through spaces that shouldn't have drafts. Around 1 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, moving for the staircase toward my room. They stopped right outside my door. Priya, I called softly in no answer. The footsteps resumed, moving past my door toward her room, then stopping again. I waited for her door to open, for some indication that she'd gotten up to use the bathroom or get water. Silence. Then the footsteps came back, past my door again, and descended the stairs. Each step creaked in sequence, the sound growing fainter until it disappeared somewhere on the first floor. I lay in bed, heart pounding, telling myself it was just the house settling, old wood expanding and contracting with temperature changes. But houses don't settle in rhythmic patterns that perfectly mimic human footsteps. The next morning, Priya looked as exhausted as I felt. Did you sleep okay? I asked carefully. No, she admitted. I kept hearing things. Footsteps, I think. And she hesitated. Did you go in my room last night? My stomach tightened. No. What? I woke up around 2, and someone was standing at the foot of my bed. Just standing there, completely still. I assumed it was you, maybe sleepwalking or something, but when I sat up to ask if you were okay, they were gone. Just vanished. Priya, I never left my room. She laughed nervously. Then I was dreaming. Had to be. The rational explanation is always the right one, right? But neither of us looked convinced that we spent the day hiking, deliberately staying out of the house as long as possible. The mountains were beautiful. Crisp October air, aspens turning gold, views that stretch for miles. We didn't talk about the night before. We didn't talk about the footsteps or the figure at the foot of Priya's bed or the breathing sound from the well. We pretended everything was normal because acknowledging it wasn't would mean confronting possibilities neither of us wanted to accept. We returned to the house around 5 as the sun was starting to set. The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere felt different, heavier. The air was thick and slightly warm, despite the cool mountain evening outside. And there was a smell, faint but distinct, like old copper and something organic that had been left to rot. "Do you smell that?" I asked. Priya nodded slowly. "Maybe something died in the walls? A rat or squirrel? But it didn't smell like a dead animal. It smelled like meat that had been digested and expelled, like the inside of something's stomach." We made dinner quickly, both of us on edge, jumping at every creak and groan from the old house. As we ate, I noticed something odd. The door to the basement, which had been firmly closed when we arrived, was now slightly ajar. Just an inch or two, but definitely open. "Did you open that?" I asked Priya. She shook her head, staring at the door. The note said not to go down there. Maybe it didn't latch properly? But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. That door had been closed, and now it wasn't. Something had opened it. Yes, if responding to my thought. The door swung wider. Not violently, but slowly, deliberately, like someone on the other side was pulling it open. It stopped when it was fully ajar, revealing a dark staircase descending into blackness. From that darkness came the sound we'd heard at the well, breathing. Deep, wet, rhythmic. The sound of lungs expanding and contracting, but wrong somehow. Too large, too slow, the exhalations lasting impossibly long. Priya stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "We're leaving. Right now." "Yes." I agreed, my voice barely a whisper that we ran to the second floor to grab our bags, taking the stairs two at a time. But when we reached the landing, we stopped. Every door on the second floor was open. All 4 bedroom doors, which we'd left closed, now stood wide, revealing dark interiors. And in each doorway stood a figure. They looked human at first glance, the right general shape and size. But the details were wrong. Their proportions were subtly off, limbs slightly too long, heads tilted at angles that should have broken their necks. They wore clothes, but the clothes were outdated, Victorian-era garments that hung on them like burial shrouds. And their faces, God, their faces were the worst part. Smooth and featureless, like wax that had started to melt but hadn't quite finished. No eyes, no mouths, no noses, just smooth expanses of pale, waxy skin. They didn't move. They just stood there, blocking our access to our rooms, to our belongings, to any escape that didn't involve going back downstairs past the open basement door. Priya grabbed my hand, her grip painfully tight. "The attic," she whispered, that we ran up the stairs to the 3rd floor, into the library. Priya slammed the door behind us and turned the lock. For a moment, we just stood there, panting, trying to process what we'd seen. "What the fuck are they?" Priya's voice cracked with hysteria. "I don't know," I said, and that was the truth. Those things weren't hallucinations. We both seen them. They weren't human, but they weren't ghosts either. They had physical presence, solid enough to cast shadows, real enough to block doorways that the sound came from below. Footsteps ascending the stairs. Slow, measured, multiple sets of feet moving in perfect synchronization. They were coming up to the attic. "The windows," I said frantically. "Can we get out through the windows?" We ran to the nearest window and looked out. The attic was 3 stories up, with no ledge, no fire escape, no tree close enough to reach. Below us was the wraparound porch, but it was a 20-foot drop on a hardwood. Even if we survived the fall, we'd likely break bones, and then we'd be injured and trapped outside with whatever those things were. The footsteps reached the 3rd floor landing. The doorknob began to turn, testing the lock. Then the breathing started. It wasn't coming from outside the door. It was coming from inside the attic, from behind the bookshelves, from the walls themselves. The entire room was breathing, the walls expanding and contracting slightly, the floor rising and falling like the chest of some massive animal. The house isn't haunted, I realized aloud, my voice shaking. The house is the haunting. It's alive. Priya stared at me, and I saw my own terror reflected in her eyes. That's not possible. Look at the walls. She did. The breathing was visible now, the wooden panels swelling outward and then contracting inward, accompanied by that wet, organic sound. The bookshelves groaned as they moved with the walls, books sliding and shifting as if being digested. The doorknob turned more insistently. Something pushed against the door, testing its strength. The wood around the lock began to splinter. We have to go through them, Priya said suddenly. It's our only option. We run, push past them, get to the car and drive. We don't stop. We don't look back. They'll kill us, I whispered. They'll kill us if we stay here, she countered. At least if we run, we have a chance. The door burst open. 3 of the figures stood in the doorway, their featureless faces somehow conveying hunger despite having no mouths, no expressions. Behind them, the 4th figure ascended the stairs. The walls breathed harder, faster, the rhythm becoming frantic. The smell of rot intensified until it was almost unbearable. Books began falling from the shelves, not randomly, but as if being pushed, ejected, vomited out by the house itself. Now, Priya screamed that we ran straight at the figures. I like to say we fought bravely, that we showed courage and determination. The truth is we ran in blind terror, screaming, swinging our arms wildly, hoping momentum would carry us through. I hit the first figure and stumbled, expecting it to be solid. Instead, it was soft, yielding, like running into a wall of wet clay. My hands sank into its chest, and the cold that radiated from it was so intense it burned. The figure didn't fight back. It simply tried to absorb me. Its body flowing around my arms like liquid wax tried to envelop my flesh. Priya grabbed the back of my jacket and yanked me backward, pulling me free with a wet, tearing sound. We stumbled past the figures, their arms reaching for us but moving too slowly, as if they existed slightly out of sync with our timeline. We flew down the stairs, taking them 3 and 4 at a time, nearly falling multiple times. The 2nd floor hallway was empty now. The figures had all moved to the attic. We grabbed nothing, didn't even look toward our rooms, just ran straight for the 1st floor. The basement door was fully open, the darkness beyond it absolute and somehow textured, as if the darkness itself was a living thing. The breathing sound roared up from below, so loud now it shook the floorboards. And something was climbing up. I couldn't see it clearly, didn't want to, but I caught glimpses of something massive pulling itself up the stairs with appendages that were too many and too wrong to be arms. That we sprinted for the front door. Priya reached it first, grabbed the handle, and pulled out. IT didn't open. No, she sobbed, yanking harder. The door didn't budge, not locked, but sealed somehow, as if the house had simply decided doors didn't open anymore. I ran to the nearest window and tried to open it. Stuck, painted shut, or maybe just fused closed by whatever force animated this place. I grabbed a heavy oak chair and swung it at the window with all my strength. The chair shattered. The window didn't even crack. Behind us, something emerged from the basement. The breathing sound came from it. I realized this was the source, the heart of whatever the house was. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. But I could hear it, wet, sliding sounds as it moved across the floor, and underneath that, a soft clicking like too many joints bending in too many directions. "The kitchen!" I shouted. "Back door!" We ran through the dining room into the kitchen. The back door stood closed, and when Priya grabbed the handle, it turned. The door opened onto the cool mountain night, stars bright overhead. The smell of pine replacing the rot, but we didn't question our luck. We ran. The car was parked in front, which meant circling around the house. We sprinted along the side of the building, our footsteps loud on the gravel. Behind us, I heard the back door slam open and that sliding, clicking thing pursuing us, moving far faster than something that size should be able to move. Priya reached the car first, yanked open the driver's side door, and dove in. I threw myself into the passenger seat, and she started the engine. Thank God it started immediately and floored the accelerator. Gravel sprayed behind us as the Subaru shot forward down the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I saw it. Just for a moment, illuminated by our taillights. A mass of pale, writhing flesh, too large to have fit through the doorway it had just emerged from, studded with faces. Dozens of smooth, featureless faces like the figures we'd seen, all pressed into the surface of this thing like bodies trapped in amber. And at its center, a mouth. A real one, impossibly huge, lined with teeth that looked human but were far too many and too long. Then we rounded a curve and the house disappeared from view. We drove for 2 hours straight, neither of us speaking, neither of us stopping until we reached a gas station on the outskirts of Pueblo. It was 3 a.m. The fluorescent lights felt like a religious experience, harsh, bright, real, and normal. We sat in the car under those lights, shaking, waiting for our hearts to slow down. "What was that?" Priya finally whispered. "I don't know. It wasn't in our heads. We both saw it." "I know." "Then what?" "I don't know." I repeated, and that was the truth. I had no framework for what we'd experienced, no rational explanation that could encompass living houses and flesh monsters and figures that existed in the spaces between real and unreal. That we filed the police report the next day, told them about the house, about the owner Wardwell, about everything. The officers listened politely, took notes, and I could see them exchanging glances that said they thought we'd taken drugs or had a folie à deux. A shared delusion. 2 days later, an officer called. They'd investigated. The address we'd given them didn't exist. There was no house at that location, just empty forest. The listing we'd booked through had been deleted, and the payment we'd made had vanished from Priya's credit card statement, as if the transaction had never occurred. Sometimes GPS coordinates get confused in the mountains. The officer explained in a tone that suggested he thought we were either lying or insane. "You probably went to the wrong location, got spooked in some abandoned building, and your mind's filled in the rest." But we knew better. Priya and I don't talk about that weekend anymore. Not because we've convinced ourselves it didn't happen, but because talking about it makes it real again in ways we can't handle. She moved to Seattle 6 months later, claimed it was for work, but I know the truth. She needed to be as far from those Colorado mountains as possible. I still work at the hospital. I still treat patients with psychosis and delusions. But now, sometimes, when a patient tells me about impossible things they've seen, about places that shouldn't exist and horrors that defy explanation, I find myself wondering if maybe some of them aren't hallucinating, wondering if maybe they stumbled into one of the cracks in reality where things like that house exist. Because here's what I know for certain. That house is still out there, still breathing, still hungry, still waiting for the next group of tired travelers to find a suspiciously cheap rental listing and think they've discovered a hidden gem. And somewhere in a basement that's larger on the inside than the house could possibly contain, there's something ancient and patient and absolutely ravenous, digesting whatever souls the house feeds it. The listing will appear again. It always does, under a different name, at a different price point, with different photos, but the same beautiful Victorian architecture. And someone will book it, excited about their getaway weekend, that I hope they read the reviews more carefully than we did. I hope they notice the warnings hidden in innocent-seeming phrases. I hope they turn around the moment something feels wrong, but they probably won't, because the house knows how to lure you in. It knows what exhausted, desperate people look like. It knows we're all just looking for a quiet place to rest. And it's so hungry. I'm Dr. Sarah Chun, and I need to tell you about the night I learned that some roads don't just connect two places, they connect two states of existence. And the toll they charge isn't money. 4 years ago, I was 31, a pediatric oncologist at Boston Children's Hospital. I'd spent the last decade watching children die despite everything modern medicine could offer. And somewhere along the way, I'd stopped believing in anything beyond what I could see under a microscope. No God, no afterlife, no cosmic justice. Just cells dividing incorrectly and families destroyed by random chance. My college roommate, Diana Rousseau, was the opposite, a theology professor at a small liberal arts college in Vermont who believed in everything. Seule divine intervention spirituelle réelle. We'd maintained our friendship through 15 years of good-natured debate, each of us convinced the other was fundamentally wrong about the nature of reality. That weekend in November, Diana had invited me to her family's cabin in northern Vermont to decompress, as she put it. She knew I'd just lost a patient, a 7-year-old girl named Emma who'd fought neuroblastoma for 3 years before her small body simply couldn't fight anymore. I'd held Emma's mother while she sobbed, given her the standard speech about how her daughter hadn't suffered at the end, and then I'd gone home and broken every piece of dishware in my kitchen because screaming wasn't enough oh yes, I needed to decompress. Diana picked me up Friday evening in her ancient green Volvo station wagon, the same car she'd driven since graduate school. She took one look at my face and didn't try to make conversation. Just handed me a thermos of chai tea and drove north. The cabin was 3 hours into Vermont's northeast kingdom, a region so remote that cell service was a distant memory and the darkness at night was absolute. We arrived around 9:30, unpacked quickly, and spent the evening doing exactly what I needed. Sitting by the fire, drinking wine, not talking about death or theology, or anything heavier than whether the new season of our favorite cooking show had declined in quality. I slept deeply that night, the kind of dreamless sleep I hadn't experienced in months. When I woke Saturday morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and I could hear Diana in the kitchen making coffee and singing off-key to some folk music station. We spent the day hiking, reading, cooking an elaborate dinner that involved Diana's grandmother's gumbo recipe and my complete inability to properly chop celery. Everything was perfect, normal, exactly what I'd needed. Sunday morning arrived too quickly. We packed slowly, neither of us eager to return to our respective realities. By the time we finished cleaning the cabin and loading the car, it was nearly 1 in the afternoon. "We should get going," Diana said, though she didn't sound enthusiastic. "It's a long drive, and I have to prep for Monday's lecture on eschatological philosophy, the study of end times." I translated, "Cheerful," she grinned, says the woman who spends her days with terminal children. We both laughed, but it was hollow. Some truths are too heavy for humor. The drive started normally. We retraced our route south, following the same winding mountain roads we'd taken Friday night. The landscape was beautiful in that stark November way. Trees bare, sky gray, everything waiting for the first snow. We listened to a true crime podcast, made fun of the investigators' obvious mistakes, and debated whether we could solve a murder better than trained professionals. Around 3:30, we reached a section of road I didn't remember from the drive up. It was a straightaway, unusual for Vermont's mountain roads, stretching ahead for what looked like miles without a single curve. The asphalt was darker than the surrounding road, almost black, and perfectly smooth. No cracks, no patches, no painted lines. Was this here before? I asked. Diana frowned. I don't think so, but I was driving at night on the way up, so maybe I just didn't notice. As we drove onto that dark stretch, the temperature inside the car dropped noticeably. Not gradually, instantly, like we'd driven into a refrigerator. Our breath began fogging despite the heater running full blast. That's weird, Diana muttered, adjusting the temperature controls. Nothing changed. The landscape on either side of the road had changed too. The forest was denser now, the trees pressing closer, their branches reaching over the road like skeletal fingers try to touch in the middle. And the light was wrong. It was mid-afternoon, but the quality of light suggested dusk. Everything dim and shadowed, despite the fact that the sun should have been high in the sky. Then we saw the toll booth. That IT appeared suddenly, materializing out of the gloom like it had been there all along, and we'd just failed to notice. A single booth sitting in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes. The structure was old, ancient, actually built from stone and dark wood that looked like it predated automobiles by centuries. A flickering lantern hung inside, casting inadequate yellow light. Diana slowed the car. "There's no toll roads in Vermont," she said slowly. "Hasn't been for decades. Maybe it's historical, part of some heritage site." But even as I said it, I knew that made no sense. Heritage sites don't block active roads. As we approached, I could see someone inside the booth. A figure, human-shaped but indistinct in the poor light, sitting perfectly still behind a small window. Diana stopped the car about 20 feet from the booth. "Should we just go around?" I looked. There was no shoulder, no space to maneuver around the booth. The forest pressed right up to the edge of the road on both sides. Trees so tightly packed that squeezing a car through was impossible. "I think we have to go through," I said, though everything in my body was screaming to turn around. Diana put the car in reverse and backed up slightly, craning her neck to see behind us. "Sarah," she said quietly. "Look." I turned. The road behind us, the road we'd just driven on, was gone. Not blocked, not obscured. Gone. Where there should have been asphalt stretching back the way we'd come, there was only forest. Dense, impassable forest that looked like it had been growing undisturbed for centuries. "That's not possible," I whispered. Diana's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Okay, there's a rational explanation. We took a wrong turn somewhere, ended up on some private road, and we're disoriented because the tree cover is making it hard to gauge direction. She was trying to convince herself. It wasn't working. That we sat there for a full minute, neither of us willing to drive forward, neither of us able to go back. The figure in the toll booth didn't move, didn't signal us forward, didn't do anything except sit there in that dim lantern light, waiting. Finally, Diana took a deep breath. "We don't have a choice. We have to go through." She drove forward slowly. As we approached, details of the booth became clearer, and each detail was wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The wood was too dark, the stone too smooth, the entire structure slightly out of focus, as if I was looking at it through water. Diana rolled down her window as we pulled up alongside. Cold air rushed in, carrying a smell that made my stomach clench. Old parchment and dried flowers, and underneath that the copper tang of blood. The figure in the booth turned to face us, and my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It was human, mostly. The proportions were right, the general structure familiar. But the details were like a painting done by someone who'd only had humans described to them. The skin was too pale and too smooth, like porcelain. The eyes were the right shape, but the wrong color. Not brown or blue or green, but gray. The flat gray of weathered stone. And when it moved, there was a slight delay, a lag between intention and action, like watching a video stream with bad latency. Toll, it said. The voice was wrong too. Not accented, not distorted, but somehow artificial, like a word processor reading text aloud. How much? Diana asked, her voice admirably steady. The figure tilted its head. Not currency. Memory. I felt Diana tense beside me. What? Memory, it repeated. One significant memory. An exchange. Safe passage for a piece of your past. That's insane, I said. Memories aren't. You can't trade them. They're neurological patterns, not physical objects. The thing that wasn't quite human looked at me. Those stone-gray eyes held no warmth, no humanity, but also no malice. Just profound, ancient indifference. You're the one who believes only in the physical, it said, though we'd never spoken before, and there was no way it could know my beliefs. But you're currently on a road that shouldn't exist, approaching a barrier that wasn't here moments ago, speaking to something your science cannot classify. Perhaps your understanding is incomplete. Diana's hand found mine, gripping tightly. What happens if we refuse? You remain. The road has no end for those who will not pay. You will drive forward forever, the booth always ahead, always out of reach, where you will sit here until your bodies fail. Either way, you do not leave. I looked in the rearview mirror. The forest behind us was closer now, I was certain of it. The trees had advanced, closing off even the possibility of backing up. What kind of memory? Diana asked. Significant. Formative. A memory that shaped who you became. The trade must have weight, or the passage cannot be granted. I felt Diana trembling beside me. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there were tears on her cheeks. My first communion, she said quietly. I was 7. The moment I felt connected to something larger than myself. The moment I knew God was real. That's the foundation of everything I've built my life on. Will that suffice? The figure regarded her for a long moment. Then it reached through the window, its arm extending much farther than human anatomy should allow, and pressed one finger to Diana's forehead. She gasped, her back arching, her hand crushing mine. For 3 seconds she stayed frozen like that, mouth open in a silent scream. Then the figure withdrew its hand, and Diana slumped forward against the steering wheel. Diana! I grabbed her shoulders, pulling her back. Her eyes were unfocused, confused. I'm okay, she said slowly. I don't. She trailed off, a frown creasing her forehead. Sarah, why did I become a theology professor? I can't. I remember choosing the major, taking the classes, writing my dissertation, but I can't remember why. What drove that decision? Horror crept up my spine. The memory she'd traded, her first communion, the foundational experience that had convinced her of God's existence, was gone. Not just faded or hard to recall, but completely erased, and with it, the entire emotional and spiritual framework that had guided her life choices. You can pass, the figure said, and the barrier, which I hadn't even seen close, lifted, revealing the road continuing on the other side. Wait, I said. She paid. We both get a pass, right? Those stone-gray eyes fixed on me. Each passenger pays their own toll. That's not. We're in the same car, Each consciousness that wishes to cross must offer payment. Those are the terms of the road. Diana's hand touched my arm. Sarah, just pay it. Please. I want to go home. But I couldn't. Everything I believed was based on the foundation that reality followed rules, that cause and effect were inviolable, that the universe operated on principles I could understand and measure. Accepting that memories could be traded to supernatural entities manning impossible toll booths meant accepting that my entire worldview was wrong. There has to be another way, I insisted. This violates every principle of, your principles do not apply here, the figure interrupted. Science is a map, but maps are not territory. You have built your understanding on a framework that does not encompass all that exists. Pay the toll or remain. Choose. In the rearview mirror, the forest was definitely closer. I could see individual branches now, reaching toward the car like grasping hands. Diana was crying openly now. Please, Sarah, I'm scared. I just want to leave. I closed my eyes. Every rational part of my mind was screaming that this couldn't be real, that we were hallucinating or dreaming or suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. But Diana's changed expression, her confusion about her own life choices, that was real. And the forest advancing behind us was real. And the cold was real, so intense now that my fingers were going numb. Fine, I whispered. What memory do you want? The most significant, the one that defines you. I knew instantly what it wanted. The memory wasn't happy. It was the opposite, but it had shaped everything that came after. Emma, my patient, the 7-year-old girl who died 3 weeks ago. Not the whole experience of treating her, but one specific moment. The day she'd asked me if dying hurt, and I'd lied and told her no, and she'd looked at me with those wise, ancient eyes and said, "It's okay, Dr. Chun. You don't have to pretend for me." That moment had broken something in me, but it had also crystallized my purpose. Every decision I'd made since then, every late night in the lab, every aggressive treatment protocol I'd pushed for, every family I'd fought to give 5 more minutes with their dying child, stemmed from that moment. From Emma's gentle, terrible wisdom and my own crushing helplessness in the face of it. Yes, the figure said, though I hadn't spoken aloud, that will suffice. Its arm extended again, that impossible reach, and pressed against my forehead. Pain. Not physical pain, but something deeper. The sensation of having a piece of yourself ripped away, leaving a wound that would never heal properly. I felt the memory dissolving, the details fading, Emma's face becoming indistinct, her words losing meaning. In 5 seconds, it was gone, completely. As if it had never happened that I slumped back in my seat, gasping. Diana grabbed my hand. "Are you okay?" "Sarah, talk to me." "I'm fine," I said automatically. But I wasn't fine. There was a void in me now, a space where something important had been. I could remember that I'd had a patient who had recently died, but I couldn't remember her name or face or any specific details. Just a vague sense that something significant had occurred. "You may pass," the figure said, and its job complete, it turned away from us, returning to its original position, facing forward, waiting for the next travelers. Diana hit the gas, and we drove through the toll booth onto the road beyond. The moment we passed through, everything changed back. The temperature rose to normal. The light brightened to proper mid-afternoon illumination. The trees retreated to appropriate distances from the road. And when I looked in the side mirror, the toll booth was gone, replaced by normal asphalt stretching back through normal forest. We drove in silence for 20 minutes before Diana finally spoke. "Sarah, what just happened?" "I don't know. That thing, it took something from us. Something important. I know, but I can't remember what I lost. I know it was significant. I can feel the absence of it, but the memory itself, is just gone. I understood exactly what she meant. The void in my chest ached with loss, but I couldn't remember what I'd lost. Just that it had mattered deeply. We didn't talk about it again during the rest of the drive. What was there to say? We'd encountered something impossible, and it had taken a piece of us in exchange for passage. And now we'd have to live with the holes it left behind. Diana dropped me off at my apartment around 8 that evening. We hugged goodbye, and I noticed she held on a little longer than usual, like she was afraid to let go. "Call me tomorrow," she asked. Of course, but she didn't call, and when I tried to reach her 3 days later, her number was disconnected. I contacted the college where she taught, and they told me Diana Russo had resigned over the weekend, citing a crisis of faith and identity. She'd cleaned out her office, terminated her lease, and left no forwarding information that she'd lost the memory of why she believed, and without that foundation, her entire life had collapsed. The career, the research, the identity she'd built, all of it rested on that one formative experience of feeling connected to God at age 7. Without it, she was adrift, a theology professor who couldn't remember why she'd ever thought theology mattered. I never saw her again. Did I ask for me? I kept working at the hospital, kept treating dying children, but something had changed. The fierce, desperate drive I'd felt before, the need to fight death with every tool available, to rage against the inevitable, was gone. I still did my job competently, but the passion had vanished along with whatever memory I traded. 3 months later, I took a sabbatical. 6 months after that, I left pediatric oncology entirely and switched to research, where I didn't have to watch children die anymore. My colleagues assumed I'd burned out, and I let them believe it because the truth that something in an impossible toll booth had surgically removed the part of me that cared was too insane to speak aloud. But here's what haunts me more than anything. That figure said the trade had to be significant, formative, weight-bearing. It took memories that defined us, which means somewhere on roads that don't appear on maps, there are toll booths collecting the most important moments of people's lives, harvesting the experiences that make us who we are. And I don't know why. What does something like that do with stolen memories? Store them? Consume them? Trade them to something even older and stranger? I have no framework for understanding, no scientific model that encompasses memory-eating entities manning supernatural toll booths. Last month, I was driving through western Massachusetts and saw it again. Just for a moment, a dark straightaway that seemed to stretch forever, trees pressing close, light quality wrong for the time of day. I turned around immediately, drove an extra 2 hours on surface streets to avoid that section of highway, because I know what would happen if I encountered that toll booth again. It would demand another memory, another piece of myself. And I'm not sure how many pieces I can lose before there's nothing left that constitutes me. Diana understood something that I've only recently begun to grasp. Belief, faith, identity. These things aren't luxuries. They're the architecture of consciousness. They're what holds us together. And when you start removing load-bearing walls, eventually the whole structure collapses. I still don't believe in God or souls or divine plans. The toll booth didn't give me faith. It took something from me, same as it took from Diana. But now I believe in something I never acknowledged before. That reality is larger and stranger than my scientific training prepared me for. That there are roads between the spaces we understand, and traveling them costs more than anyone should have to pay to. If you're driving alone on an unfamiliar road and you see a straightaway that doesn't quite look right, too dark, too straight, trees too close, turn around. Drive the long way. Add hours to your trip, because some shortcuts lead to places you can't return from intact. And if you see a toll booth that shouldn't exist with a figure that moves slightly wrong sitting in dim lantern light, don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't try to negotiate. Just pray that you never get close enough for it to ask what memory you're willing to trade, because it will know which one matters most. It will reach into your mind and find the moment that made you who you are. And when it takes that moment, you won't die. Death would be mercy. Instead, you'll keep living, keep working, keep going through the motions of existence. But you'll be hollow, a shell going through routines you can't remember choosing, motivated by drives you no longer understand, wondering why nothing feels meaningful anymore. Diana sent me one letter, 6 months after she disappeared. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in Oregon. Just 3 sentences. I found a church yesterday and sat in a pew for an hour, waiting to feel something. Nothing came. Whatever I was searching for my whole life, I can't remember why it mattered. That's what the toll road does. It doesn't kill you. It doesn't trap you there forever. It lets you pass. But the version of you that reaches the other side isn't the same person who approached the booth. Something fundamental is missing, carved out, leaving you functional but fundamentally broken in ways you can't even articulate, because the language for describing what you've lost was taken along with the memory itself, that I have no idea where Diana is now, or if she's become without the foundation of her faith. I don't know what she fills her days with, what gives her purpose, what gets her out of bed in the morning. And the worst part, I suspect she doesn't know either. The toll road is still out there, still harvesting the moments that define us, still letting people pass in exchange for pieces of their souls. And every day, someone takes a wrong turn, sees that dark straightaway, and thinks they found a faster route home. They haven't. They've found the slowest death imaginable. The kind where your body keeps living long after everything that made life worth living has been surgically excised and added to some cosmic collection of stolen significance. So please, if you remember nothing else from this story, remember this: some prices are too high to pay, even for safe passage, especially for safe passage. Because the real horror isn't being trapped on that road forever. It's successfully crossing and spending the rest of your life trying to remember why anything ever mattered in the first place. I'm Morgan Castellano, and I need to tell you about the night that proves some roads don't actually lead anywhere. They just swallow people whole. 3 years ago, I was 25, working as a graphic designer in Minneapolis, living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment that smelled perpetually of the Indian restaurant downstairs. My best friend since middle school, Cassie Brennan, had just moved to Boulder, Colorado for her master's program in environmental science. We've been inseparable growing up. The kind of friendship where you don't need to explain yourself, where silence is comfortable, where you know each other's coffee orders and family drama without asking. When Cassie called me one Friday in late September, her voice cracking with homesickness, I didn't hesitate. I'm coming to visit. Road trip. This weekend. Don't argue. She laughed, but I could hear the relief. You're insane. That's like 12 hours. 11 and a half if I speed. I corrected, which I will. The truth was, I needed the trip as much as she did. Work had become suffocating. Endless revisions for clients who couldn't articulate what they wanted, a boss who thought creative flexibility meant working weekends for free, and a dating life that had devolved into a series of disappointing coffee meetings with men who talked about cryptocurrency for 45 minutes straight. I needed open highway, terrible gas station coffee, and my best friend's chaotic energy that I left Minneapolis at 5 a.m. on Saturday. My silver 2014 Mazda 3 packed with snacks, a duffel bag, and a playlist Cassie and I have been building since high school. An eclectic mess of indie folk, 2000s pop punk, and inexplicably 3 Dolly Parton songs. The September morning was crisp, The sky, that particular shade of bruised purple that happens right before sunrise. I felt good, free, like I was driving away from everything suffocating me. The first 8 hours were perfect. I sang badly to music, stopped at a roadside diner in Nebraska for pancakes that tasted like cardboard but cost $3, called my mom to assure her I wasn't going to get murdered, and watched the landscape shift from flat Midwestern plains to the gradual rise of foothills. Everything felt normal, manageable, exactly what I needed. I crossed into Colorado around 2 p.m. and the sky started changing. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift. Clouds rolled in, thick and gray, pressing down like a weighted blanket. The temperature dropped. I cranked the heat and kept driving. Around 4:30 p.m., my GPS did something weird. The route flickered, then recalculated, then flickered again. The little blue line showing my path forward stuttered like a glitch in a video game. "Come on," I muttered, tapping the screen. "Don't do this to me now," the GPS voice announced. "In 0.3 miles, take exit 247B. I frowned. I didn't remember an exit 247B being part of the route earlier. But the GPS insisted, and honestly, I was tired. My lower back ached from sitting, my eyes felt gritty from staring at the road, and I just wanted to trust the technology and get to Cassie's apartment before dark. That I took the exit. The off-ramp curved sharply, descending into an area that felt immediately wrong. The trees here were different, taller, darker, packed so tightly together that sunlight barely penetrated. The road narrowed from 2 lanes to 1. The asphalt cracked and uneven, weeds pushing through like fingers. My phone buzzed. "Cassie, where are you?" "ETA." I glanced at the GPS. It showed me on a road, but the road had no name. Just a blank gray line on the map. No street signs, no route numbers, nothing that I typed back. GPS is being weird. Took some exit. Should be there in like 90 minutes. Her response was immediate. "What exit?" "You're cutting it close. It gets dark early here." I looked around for a sign, a landmark, anything to give her specifics. Nothing. Just trees and the narrow, deteriorating road stretching ahead. Not sure. "I'll text when I'm closer." I drove for another 10 minutes. The trees pressed closer. The road twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Sharp turns that doubled back on themselves. Inclines that felt too steep for a regular highway. My phone lost signal entirely. The little bars at the top of the screen vanished, replaced by no service. "Okay, this is officially creepy," I said aloud, as if hearing my own voice would make it less unsettling. The GPS suddenly announced, "Continue for 1.4 miles. Continue to where? There was nothing out here. No houses, no gas stations, no other cars. The forest had swallowed everything. I considered turning around, but the road was too narrow. No shoulder, no turn-off points, just a single lane hemmed in by trees. I'd have to keep going until I found a place wide enough to execute a 3-point turn. Then I saw it. A mileage marker. Faded green metal, half hidden by overgrown brush. Mile 14. That relief flooded through me. Okay, markers meant this was a real road, maintained by someone, even if it looked abandoned. I kept driving. 3 minutes later, I passed another marker. Mile 14. I blinked, confused. That couldn't be right. I'd been driving forward the whole time, at least 35 miles per hour. I should have reached mile 15 or mile 16, not another mile 14 marker. Maybe I misread the first one. Maybe it said 13 or 15, and my tired brain had filled in the wrong number. I kept going, eyes scanning for the next marker. 5 minutes passed. The forest grew darker, shadows deepening despite it only being around 5 p.m. The temperature inside the car dropped noticeably, even though the heat was on full blast. My breath started fogging the windshield. Then, mile 14.m, why stomach twisted. Same marker. Same exact placement relative to a distinctive bent tree on the right side of the road. I recognized the tree. I noticed it the first time because it curved at a perfect 90-degree angle, like something had broken it when it was young and it had healed wrong. No, you whispered. No, that's not possible. I pressed harder on the gas, pushing the car to 50 miles per hour on the narrow, winding road. The tires screeched slightly on the turns, but I didn't care. I needed to see a different marker, needed to prove I was moving forward. 0.4 minutes later. Mile 14.m, Y hand started shaking on the steering wheel. This wasn't possible. This violated every law of physics, every rule of reality. Roads don't loop back on themselves unless they're explicitly marked as loops. And even then, you'd see signs, warnings, something that I grabbed my phone, desperate to call someone, to hear another human voice, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. No service. I tried anyway, dialing Cassie's number. The call failed immediately. The GPS had gone silent. The screen still showed the blank gray road, but the blue dot representing my car wasn't moving anymore. It just sat there, stationary, as if I parked, but I was driving. The speedometer read 48 miles per hour. I passed mile 14 again, and again, and again. Each time, the exact same marker, the exact same bent tree, the exact same configuration of shadows and branches. I was trapped in a mile that repeated itself, a loop with no exit, no explanation, no escape. Panic clawed up my throat. I screamed, a raw, primal sound that hurt my vocal cords. I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a stop in the middle of the road. Silence crashed down. No wind, no birds, no distant hum of traffic. Just oppressive, suffocating quiet that I sat there, chest heaving, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Think, Morgan. Think. Maybe I was having a mental breakdown. Maybe the stress from work, the exhaustion from driving, the isolation had finally cracked something in my brain, or maybe a figure stepped onto the road ahead that I gasped, my heart slamming against my ribs, that T was a woman. Pale skin, long dark hair, wearing what looked like a summer dress despite the cold. She stood perfectly still, facing me, about 50 feet away. Hello. I called through the closed window, my voice barely audible. She didn't respond. Didn't wave, didn't move. Just stood there, staring. I honked the horn, 3 short blasts. The sound echoed weirdly, like it was being absorbed by the trees rather than bouncing off them. The woman tilted her head slowly, unnaturally, an angle that made my skin crawl. Then she started walking toward me. Not fast, not slow. Steady. Mechanical. Her feet didn't seem to quite touch the ground. Or maybe that was just a trick of the shadows that I threw the car into reverse and floored it. The Mazda shot backward, engine whining. I didn't look where I was going, didn't care. I just needed distance from that woman, from her wrong movements, from the way she'd looked at me like I was something she'd been waiting for, that I reversed for maybe 30 seconds, then slammed the brakes again and spun the wheel, trying to turn around. The road was too narrow. My front bumper scraped against a tree, and the sound of metal on bark made me flinch. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman was gone. But in her place, standing in the exact spot she'd been, was someone else. A man this time, tall, wearing what looked like old work clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt. Same unnatural stillness. Same tilted head. No. I whispered that I put the car in drive and gunned it, swerving around where the man stood. As I passed him, I made the mistake of looking. His eyes were wrong. Too wide, pupils dilated to the point where the iris was barely visible, and they didn't track my movement. They just stared straight ahead, vacant and glassy. That I drove hard and fast, taking the curves recklessly, not caring if I crashed, because crashing felt preferable to staying on this road any longer. Mile 14. Mile 14. Mile 14. I sobbed, tears blurring my vision. Please, I beg no one. Please let me out. Please. The sun was gone now, though I had no idea how. It shouldn't have been full dark yet, but the forest was pitch black except for my headlights cutting through the void. And then I saw them. More figures. 5, 6, maybe more, standing along the sides of the road, spaced evenly like sentries. Men, women, even what looked like a child, all wearing different clothes from different eras. A woman in a 1950s style dress, a man in overalls that looked like they were from the Depression era, someone in modern jeans and a hoodie. It didn't move as I passed, just watched with those same empty, wrong eyes that I realized with creeping horror what they were: other travelers. People who'd taken this exit, gotten trapped in the loop, and never left. Their bodies might have been somewhere. Crash cars in the ravines, skeletal remains in the woods. But something of them remained here, stuck in mile 14 forever. I couldn't become one of them. I refused that. I forced myself to think through the panic. Loops have breaks. Glitches have exploits. If this was some kind of spatial anomaly, some fold in reality, there had to be a way out. The GPS. Even though it had glitched, maybe it held a clue that I grabbed my phone while driving one-handed and forced myself to look at the frozen GPS screen. The blue dot was stationary, but when I zoomed out, I noticed something I'd missed before: a tiny, almost imperceptible second road branching off the main one. It wasn't marked, wasn't labeled, just a faint gray line barely distinguishable from the background. Could it be real? Or was it another trap? I didn't have a choice. Staying on this road meant becoming one of the watchers, one of the empty-eyed figures standing eternal guard over mile 14 that I slowed down, scanning the tree line for anything that looked like a turnoff. The headlights swept across dense undergrowth, impenetrable walls of trees, nothing that resembled a road. Then I saw it, a gap. So small and overgrown, I almost missed it. Branches hung low, nearly concealing what might have once been a dirt path that I didn't hesitate. I cranked the wheel and drove straight into the gap. Branches scraped along both sides of the car with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The undercarriage scraped against something, a rock, a log, I couldn't tell. The path was barely wider than my car, and I had no idea where it led, but anywhere was better than mile 14. The path twisted and climbed, the incline so steep I worried the car would slide backward. Thorns scraped my windows. Something heavy, a branch, or maybe worse, thumped against the roof. And then, abruptly, the path ended. I burst out of the trees onto a normal highway. Smooth asphalt, painted lines, street lights just beginning to flicker on in the gathering dusk that I slammed on the brakes, panting, and looked around wildly. A green highway sign stood 20 feet ahead. Boulder, 23 miles. My phone buzzed. Signal had returned. A flood of text from Cassie lit up the screen. "Where are you?" "Morgan, seriously, answer your phone. It's been 3 hours since you texted. I'm getting worried. 3 hours. I've been trapped in that loop for 3 hours. Though it had felt both shorter and infinitely longer, that I pulled over on the shoulder, hands trembling too badly to drive safely, and called her. "Morgan." She answered on the first ring. "What the hell?" I was about to call the police. My voice cracked. I got lost. The GPS took me somewhere wrong. Wrong how? Where were you? I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I describe mile 14? The loop, the figures, the impossible geometry of a road that fed back into itself. "I don't know." I finally whispered. "I don't know where I was." I made it to Cassie's apartment an hour later. She took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just pulled me into a hug and made tea and let me sit on her couch in silence until I was ready to talk. When I finally told her everything, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said quietly, "We should report it." "Report what?" That I drove on a road that doesn't exist? That I saw ghost people standing in the woods? No, that the GPS routed you somewhere dangerous. There could be other people. I interrupted. There are other people. I saw them. She went pale. The next day, she insisted we drive back to where I'd exited the loop, back to the highway where I'd emerged. We found the spot easily. My car had left distinctive scrape marks where I'd crashed through the undergrowth. But when we got out and looked, there was no gap, no overgrown path, just solid, unbroken forest, trees packed so tightly together a person couldn't walk between them, let alone drive a car. Cassie stared at the trees, then at the scrape marks on the highway, then back at the trees. Morgan, I know. How did you? I don't know. We drove back to Boulder in silence, that I never took that exit again. I've driven to visit Cassie a dozen times since then, and every time my GPS tries to route me through exit 247B. Every single time, I ignore it and stay on the main highway, even though it adds 40 minutes to the drive, because I know what's waiting on that exit. I know about mile 14 and the figures who watch and wait. I know about roads that loop forever, trapping time and space and people in an endless repetition. And I know I'm one of the lucky ones that got out. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving alone, I glance at my GPS and see it flicker. I see that blank gray road appear for just a moment before the screen corrects itself. And I wonder how many other people have taken exit 247B. How many are still driving through mile 14, passing the same marker over and over, slowly becoming one of the watchers themselves? I wonder if someday someone else will drive that loop and see a new figure standing by the road. A woman with long brown hair wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, standing perfectly still, head tilted at an unnatural angle. And I wonder if that figure will be me. Because part of me never left that road. Part of me is still there, trapped in the mile that never ends, watching for the next car that takes the wrong exit. Some roads don't lead anywhere. They just keep you forever.